It is a double parasha this week. So the second parasha we're going to read is called Balak. And Balak was a king. He was a Moabite king, no friend of the Jews by any stretch of the imagination. But in this particular case, you can kind of understand where he was coming from and why he was bent on trying to stop the Jews in their tracks. In spite of the fact that he was an antisemite, he had a real worry, a real concern. The Jews were on his border. They were on their way to the promised land. And as far as he could tell, and I don't think he was wrong, they were coming for him. He was worried that they were going to wipe him out. So he hires a fellow called Bilam. Bilam at that time was the greatest Gentile prophet. And the truth is, in the course of history, he's the greatest Gentile prophet in history. So he hires Bilam to curse the Jewish nation in order to prevent the attack. As we very well know, the story of Bilam is a phenomenal story because he comes there with as much venom as Balak had, maybe even more. He's also no friend of the Jews. But at the same time, he knows that he's a prophet, and a prophet means that he cannot say things prophetically unless Hashem blesses him to say them. And he says that up front. He says, I just want a disclaimer before we start. I can only say prophetic words that Hashem puts into my mouth. And he goes one time after the next, and it just becomes more and more of an absolute stress for Balak. Because what happens is every time he's about to start a curse of the Jewish nation, the most incredible brachas come out. Beautiful brachas. He speaks about how wonderful the Jewish camp is, how the Jews are so enthusiastic to do what Hashem wants, how nobody can touch us, and so on. By the end of it, Balak is absolutely furious, as you can well imagine. This was not a good investment on his part. He's not seeing the results that he wanted, and he is livid. And he starts to literally, the Torah says, he starts slapping his hands together, and he says, I thought I would be able to honor you, Bilam, and give you a huge amount of money. In the meantime, Hashem has prevented you from having any kind of honor or respect. You're going to go home disgraced. And he says, that's it, I've heard enough. Get out of here. And then there's a magnificent moment. Bilam turns around to Balak and he says, well, I'm not quite done yet. You're ready to send me home, but I'm not exactly finished. And he says, Lecha'i atzcha, let me advise you. Ma yaseh ha'am hazeh la'amcha b'acharis hayomim. What this nation, meaning the Jewish people, is going to do to your nation at the end of days. And what's so magnificent about this is that out of the 5 books of the Chumash, the 5 books of the Torah, this is the only place where we have an overt prophecy about Moshiach. You want to look in the other books of the Tanakh, jam-packed about messianic prophecies. So much so that the Rambam says that they are absolutely full of prophecies about Moshiach, almost implying that even those things that are not overtly about the Messianic era are also about the Messianic era. But out of the 5 books of the Chumash, this is the only time where we have somebody who gets up and says, clearly, I'm speaking prophecy about the end of days. And you know what's so magnificent about it? Who's the guy? There are many prophets who Hashem could have chosen to convey these kinds of messages. Moshe himself, the greatest prophet who ever lived, never says an outright prophecy about the time of Moshiach. And I say outright because there are various things that he says which allude to the time of Moshiach. But nothing outright. Bilam is the one who says it outright. And that in itself already tells you something about Moshiach. Before we even get into the details, because what we'll do is we'll look at 1 or 2 of the things that he says. But even before that, what's fascinating about this is the nature of Moshiach. Everybody understands that Moshiach is going to come. And of course we daven and we hope that Moshiach will come immediately. Most rabbis end off their speech or their sermon by saying, and we should merit the coming of the Moshiach speedily in our days. And you almost get the feeling a lot of the time that speedily in our days is like a throwaway comment. It's a cliche and it doesn't really mean anything. But in our davening we say, Lishu Oschal Kivinu Kol Hayoim, that every day, throughout the whole day, we anticipate Mashiach coming. And the Rambam writes similarly, that Kol Mi She'eno Mamin Boy, any person who does not believe in Mashiach. But then he continues, and you don't wait with anticipation for Mashiach to come today, that is a rejection of Judaism. So yes, we don't believe that it's this long off, somewhere down the line in the future kind of an event. We believe that it's imminent and it could literally happen today. So most people think, what's Moshiach? Moshiach's going to arrive. It'll be headline news. You can assume that all the networks who usually don't have such nice things to say about the Jewish community are suddenly going to be vying for interviews with a rabbi. So then you know you're living in Moshiach's times. And they're going to be vying for interviews with a rabbi who wants to restore the Jewish commonwealth in the land of Israel with expanded borders. So when they start to give him airtime, then you definitely know that we're living in the time of Moshiach. So in any event, so that's how we think, Moshiach's going to be this great man who's going to arrive. And Moshiach is going to what? He's going to put our enemies in their place. That's kind of how we see it. And because Jews, through the course of our history, have suffered so much at the hands of various civilizations, there's a little nachas, I suppose, to think they're going to get their just desserts. It's going to be payback time. And it will. Except that in our minds, we think that payback time is this great, as the verse says, that Elijah will come on Hayoim HaGodol VaHanoira, the great and awesome day, which makes it sound, like some kind of an Armageddon and all these people are going to die. But actually, this story of Bilam teaches us that there's a sweeter vengeance against our enemies than to destroy them, actually. Imagine a guy like Bilam. Just imagine that for a second. Here is a person who absolutely hated the Jewish nation. In fact, we're taught in the Midrash and in the Gemara that he was one of the advisors to Pharaoh originally, when Pharaoh wanted to know what he should do about his Jewish problem. He had 3 advisors. One advisor was a fellow called Yisroi, who later became the father-in-law of Moshe, and he realized that this was going to go bad and that Pharaoh was going to do bad things to the Jews. So he resigned his position and he left. He left the country. He emigrated. There was another fellow there called Job. He sat there and he wasn't quite sure what to say, so he said nothing. And there was a fellow there called Bilam. And Bilam said, this is what you should do. And he helped to map out the plan of, firstly, the annihilation of the babies, and then the subjugation of the Jewish people as slaves, and all the terrible things. It was all on Bilam. So you can imagine what kind of hatred Bilam had for these people. You read the story in this week's Torah portion. Bilam is a very respected man in his hometown, or in his home country. He is the greatest seer in the entire world outside of the Jewish nation at that time. He's a person of prestige, he's a person of wealth. But the minute he's offered an opportunity to come to curse the Jews, the Torah tells us that he prepares his own donkey in the morning. I mean, he had a whole lot of servants who could have done the work and normally would have done the work for him. But he saddles his own donkey because he's so enthusiastic to have this opportunity to spew his curses on the Jewish people that nothing could stop him. And then when he gets up and he says a brocha, he says, you know what, let me try again. Maybe this time I'll be able to find the way to get Hashem to curse them. And then when that fails, he says, let me try again. This guy, he's a diehard. He's not willing to let go of his opportunity to spew his vitriol. So what happens to him? He's the one who blesses us. That tells us 2 incredible things. Firstly, it tells us that there is nothing that is more satisfying than to have your enemy have to acknowledge your greatness. Really, there's nothing like that. The kind of person who says, don't use a particular product because it's made in Israel. And then they need to have that product in order to keep themselves alive. There's a huge nachas in that. You had a big mouth, eh? You had a lot to say. Now it's come back to bite you. Now you have to eat humble pie. Now you have to acknowledge our greatness. So that's the first lesson of the story of Bilam. When Moshiach comes, we're not interested, as Jewish people, we're not interested in the destruction of our enemies in the colloquial sense. We're not interested in killing everybody who tried to harm us through the course of our history. To us, there's something far more profound that could and should happen. Those people spin around and they are the ones who sing our praises. They are the ones who acknowledge our greatness. That's the ultimate. In fact, one of the prophecies that Bilam says in this parasha is he says, V'karkar kol b'nei Shes, which basically means that all the descendants of Shes was the third son of Adam, all the descendants of Shes should be destroyed. Now the Gemara goes into a whole analysis and says, well, what exactly does that mean? And there are various opinions. One opinion says 1/3 of the human population will be wiped out when Moshiach comes. Another opinion is that all of those who do not defer to Hashem's authority, in other words, they don't practice the 7 Noachad laws, all of them will be wiped out. Sounds very terrible. Sounds Armageddon-like. And the Rebbe gives a whole in-depth explanation, but the bottom line of his explanation is V'karkar kol b'nei Shes does not mean you destroy people physically by killing them. Rather, you destroy everything that they used to believe in, all the toxic thinking that they used to have. That's what you destroy. So that they don't even know themselves anymore. They look in the mirror and they say, I cannot believe who I was and who I am now. I cannot believe that I was so hateful and who I am now. I cannot believe that I was somebody who had so much negative flowing through my veins, and now all I want is to go up, as the prophet Zechariah says, and to celebrate the festivals together with the Jewish people in Israel. That is the ultimate, what we call vengeance. Because we're not interested in vengeance. We're interested in transformation. Which brings us to the second point. The goal of Moshiach is to take the most spiritually impure, the most spiritually misguided parts of this world, the lowest of the low, and elevate them to a place of greatness. Bilam, the worst person of that generation, should become the one who says the blessings of the Jewish people. That is messianic already. Who's the one who prophesies about Moshiach? Bilam. Why? Because the fact that he prophesizes about Moshiach, that in itself is already messianic. That's the conversion, the turnaround of negative to positive, darkness to light, evil to good, and that's really what Moshiach is all about.